Good day everyone, especially to our professor, Miss Lardinia Tegiam, Mom. Before I start, I would just like first to introduce myself to you. By the way, I am Condring Barceliano Conciso from Katayawan, Lalok, Cagayan, and I graduated at Cagayan State University, Lalok campus. I took Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education, major in Social Science, and currently teaching at Ballesteros National High School. Fundamentally, history involves a process of interpreting the past based on evidence available in the present. This entails using accounts inherited from earlier times, although each generation reinterprets history in light of contemporary questions. History claims a scientific status through its careful use of sources and the weighing of evidence. The most common mistake made by history students and occasionally well-established historians is to project views and opinions common in one era back onto an earlier era. This cannot legitimately done without strong evidence that those views and opinions were held at the earlier time. In particular, people are prone to project contemporary assumptions onto the past. Another very common error is to assume that a short passage of time makes little or no difference to the intellectual climate of time. In fact, in political, social, and other spheres of life, 10 years can make a very big difference, particularly when dealing with modern history. So this time, I will tackle it to you the methods of history. As an academic discipline, history emerged in the late 19th century, although great historians have record in Western civilization since the early Greeks. The Abrahamic religions are essentially historical and encourage the study of history because they believe God has revealed himself in time. So what is historical method? Historical method is the collection of techniques and guidelines that historians use to research and write histories of the past. So secondary sources, primary sources, and material evidence such as that derive from archaeology may all be drawn on, and the historian's skill lies in identifying these sources, evaluating their relative authority, and combining their testimony appropriately in order to construct an accurate and reliable picture of past events and environments. In the philosophy of history, the question of the nature and the possibility of a sound historical method is raised within the subfield of epistemology. The study of historical method and of different ways of writing history is known as historiography, or what we call historiography means the writing of history. So especially the writing of history based on the critical examination of sources, the selection of particular details from the authentic materials in those sources, and the synthesis of those details into a narrative that stands the test of critical examination. The term historiography also refers to the theory and history of historical writing. So we go now to the source of criticism, or the so-called, or what we call evaluation, which is, this is your conclusion about how trustworthy and useful a source is. Your evaluation needs to be based upon your analysis of the source. So what is source criticism? Source criticism or information evaluation, as I've said a while back, it is the process of evaluating the qualities of an information source, such as its validity, reliability, and relevance to the subject under investigation. So according to Gilbert A. Garakan and Jean de Langles, divide the source into six inquiries. So what are those? When? When was the source written or unwritten produced? The date. And where was it produced? The localization of the source. And by whom was it produced? The authorship. Who wrote that source? And from what pre-existing material was it produced? Analysis. In what original form was it produced? The integrity. And what is the evidential value of its contents? Its credibility. So as you notice, the first four, are known as the higher criticism, and the fifth is the lower criticism, and together is what we call the external criticism. Okay? And the sixth and final inquiry about a source is called the internal criticism. Together, this inquiry is known as the source criticism. Okay, what is the difference? Okay, to further understand the difference between external criticism and internal criticism, let's define what is external criticism. It is sometimes said that its function is negative or merely saving us from using false evidence, right? While in internal criticism, its internal criticism has the positive function of telling us how to use authenticated evidence. So that is the difference between the internal and external criticism. So we go now to the different types of sources. So what is primary sources? So these are the earliest available accounts of an event which are used by later writers to interpret that event. They are the raw material used by other writers to provide them with information and data. In using primary source, it is important to recognize the value judgment made by the people who wrote them and the intent of the author in writing the original document. Like for example, a diary. Okay? Next is secondary source. So what is secondary source? These are works that discusses a subject either from a great distance or after the event on the basis of second-hand or even more remote information. It provides interpretations and make judgments about primary sources. Finally, always use more than one source. Be sure that the information is trustworthy and reliable. So there's consistency. There's a consistent source. Or try to use different types of sources like newspapers, websites, books, magazines, experts, etc. So let's watch this video to further understand what is the difference of primary and secondary source.
In the field of history, sources are very significant. Without it, the reconstruction of the past will be impossible. A source, by definition, is one that provides information. In the case of history, it is divided into two, the primary and the secondary sources. Primary sources are the testimonies of eyewitnesses or participants. Artifacts or objects are also considered as such. These sources are those that are contemporaneous with or present during the time period under study. Types of primary sources are generally divided into three: documents, creative works, and relics or artifacts. In order to better understand these sources, specific examples of the following are as follows. For the documents, there are diaries, speeches, manuscripts, letters, interviews, official records, and the like. For creative works, examples are poems, dramas, novels, music, and art. And lastly, some examples for the artifacts or relics are potteries, furniture, clothing, and buildings. Historians and students of history would like to work with primary sources in order to comprehend the past on its own terms. This gives the students the opportunity to create an analysis and interpret the past from what they've read, saw, and heard. In contrast to primary sources, which revolve on what the eyewitnesses perceived, secondary sources are those that are already interpreted based on primary sources. In addition, it may also include pictures, quotes, and graphics from primary sources. Secondary sources are often removed from the event in question. This is due to the fact that it was not made firsthand by someone who had participation in the historical event in question. Having said this, it generally offers a different perspective compared with primary sources. This removes the students from interpreting the primary source and exposes them to the author's interpretation, opinions, and analysis. Some examples of secondary sources are the following: textbooks, journal articles which interprets previous research, criticisms, commentaries, annotations, and encyclopedias. Both sources are equally important for the student of history. While the secondary sources aid in situating the context and acquiring background knowledge of the historical event in question, primary sources provide an account or testimony on how the historical event itself unraveled. Moreover, students will have an opportunity to interpret a source based on their own understanding. There will be no right or wrong interpretation, only valid or invalid, which is based on how close to the facts did the interpretation was done. Determining the merit of a source is done through historical criticism. Not all sources should be taken as it is. Rather, the student of history must carefully examine and evaluate them. Basic matters about its form and content must be settled first before it can be used as historical evidence. Historical criticism is done through external and internal evaluation. The former deals with a source's authenticity, while the latter tackles its credibility. External evaluation or criticism revolves around a source's authenticity. This means that through this type of criticism or evaluation, the student will be able to determine if the source is forged, faked, or fabricated, a hoax, or a misinterpretation. Focus on the authenticity of the document. The student of history will be determining factors such as the date, the author's handwriting and signature, and his or her inconsistencies or anachronism in the use of grammar, idioms, punctuations, orthography, and reference to the events. In addition, the provenance or its origin is also to be determined. Lastly, the semantics or the meaning of words and phrases should also be identified along with the source's clearness in meaning or ambiguity. On the other hand, internal evaluation tackles a source's credibility by identifying the author in order to determine his reliability, mental processes, personal attitudes, and his ability and willingness to tell the truth. Also, through the corroboration of historical facts, such as independent testimonies of more than two reliable sources, the credibility of the source in question could now be determined. The student of history must not take a source as it is. Much like in the contemporary time, one must analyze, examine, and evaluate information before subscribing to its ideas. In doing so, the student of history will develop critical thinking and analytical skills, which will eventually aid them in the assessment of primary sources in reconstructing the history of the Filipino people.
Thank you for watching. So this time, how to analyze historical sources. Let's watch this video. Again.
When studying history, you will be frequently asked to evaluate historical sources. However, you may not know what this means or how to do it. In this video, I will explain what source evaluation is, give you a step-by-step guide to follow, and show you some examples to help you out. Let's begin. Welcome back to another History Skills video. Today we're looking at how to evaluate historical sources. Source evaluation is one of the most important skills you'll need to develop when studying the past, and mastering it will help you achieve your best possible results. But what is source evaluation? Evaluation is your ability to reach your own conclusion about how trustworthy and useful a particular historical source is to the topic that you're studying. Therefore, you'll have to clearly state whether a source is very, somewhat, not very, useful or reliable. However, in drawing your conclusions through your evaluation, you cannot just make your decision without having reasons for it. Therefore, you'll be required to support your evaluation by drawing upon your analysis of the source, which you need to have done first. If you don't know how to analyze a source, click the link to the source analysis video in the description below. You'll need to use source evaluation in all of your history assessment pieces, particularly in your essay writing. Don't worry though, you do not need to write a lot in order to show your source evaluation, and it is possible to show sophisticated evaluation through only a few well-chosen words. There are two main evaluation skills you will use when forming your own judgment about sources. These are usefulness and reliability. I've made separate videos on each of these two evaluation skills, which explain each one in more detail. So if you're struggling with a particular one of these skills, please watch the videos by clicking the links in the description section below. When you reach your decision about whether a particular historical source is useful or reliable, you need to justify this conclusion by basing your evaluation upon your source analysis. To show your evaluation and the reasons you have for reaching this decision, you need to write an evaluation statement. An evaluation statement has three elements. Firstly, it has a clear judgment about a source's usefulness or reliability. For example, this source is extremely useful, or this source is not very reliable. Secondly, it has a cohesive statement that indicates that you're about to provide reasons for your judgment. For example, this source is very useful because, or this source is not reliable since. Thirdly, it has a specific reason or two from your source analysis that justifies your conclusion. For example, this source is very useful because it mentions the exact number of people affected by the event. Or, this source is not very reliable since the author is not an expert on the topic. The use of your source analysis skills to support your evaluation is central to your success in this skill. So which analysis skills do you use for each evaluation skill? Well, in a previous video, I explained that there are 6 source analysis skills: information, origin, perspective, context, audience, and motive. You are to use your answers to these 6 analysis skills to support your evaluation. Thankfully, there is a natural link between which analysis skills you use to support each of the 2 evaluation skills. Firstly, you typically draw upon the information section of your analysis to prove that a source is useful. For example, this source is useful in understanding the experience of combat in the Middle Ages because it describes the way that weapons and armour were used in the Battle of Agincourt. And secondly, you draw upon the remaining 5 analysis skills: origin, perspective, context, audience, and motive, to prove that a source is reliable. For example, as the author of this source personally fought in the battle and wrote down their experiences the day after the event, they can be considered a reliable source. Please remember that you don't need to use all of these analysis skills every time, but draw on one or two to provide a strong argument as to why the source is reliable. Once you have chosen your analysis skills that you will use to support your evaluation of a source, you are ready to demonstrate your complete source evaluation in a paragraph format. An evaluation paragraph should draw upon as many analysis skills as you require to provide the strongest possible argument for the usefulness and reliability of your source. A good source evaluation can be as short as 2 sentences if you follow these steps. In the first sentence, evaluate a source's usefulness by drawing upon the information in the source and by providing a quote. For example, Martin Luther King's telegram is very useful in understanding his motivations, as it states that a reign of terror is still alive in Birmingham, Alabama, and it is by far the worst big city in race relations in the United States. In the second sentence, evaluate a source's reliability by drawing upon the origin, perspective, context, audience, and motive of the source. For example, Martin Luther King's 1963 letter from Birmingham jail is a particularly reliable record of his reasons for taking part in the local protest, as it was written by King himself just days after his April 16th arrest in Birmingham, Alabama. As you can see, you can demonstrate a sophisticated evaluation of a source in a succinct manner using this structure. However, even though this can be done in just 2 sentences, it is perfectly acceptable to use more sentences if required. But as a general rule of thumb, the more analysis skills you use to justify your evaluation of a source, the better your response will be. Now that you know what source evaluation is and how to do it, let's look at a full example to increase your confidence in the process. For this example, we'll be looking at the topic of gladiators in ancient Rome. The source we've been asked to use is a book called Colosseum, which was written by 2 people named Keith Hopkins and Mary Beard. Before we evaluate this source, we needed to conduct an analysis of the source by doing some background research on the 2 authors. After we found out the source's information, origin, perspective, context, audience, and motive, this is how we evaluated it. Usefulness. The book Colosseum by Keith Hopkins and Mary Beard is extremely useful in understanding the survival rates of gladiators in ancient Rome, since it states that there was a death rate of about 1 gladiator in 6 in each show. Reliability. Both Hopkins and Beard are extremely reliable authors because they are both professors of history and classics at the University of Cambridge, and their writing is a result of decades of research on ancient Rome. Now that you have a better understanding of what source evaluation is, I hope that you feel more confident in your studies. If you need further explanations,
Okay, that ends the video. Very well said, sir. So let's review. So there are 6 sources analysis skills. The first one is the information. The second one is the origin. The third is the perspective. The fourth is the context. And the audience, motive. And that is the 6 sources of analysis skills. For us to use to prove usefulness, that is the information. And for us to use or to prove its reliability, that is the origin, perspective, context, audience, and motive. Example. So the origin in that sentence, in that example, is Martin Luther King, 1963. So the information is the letter from Birmingham jail is a particular reliable record of his reason for taking part in the local protest. And the perspective there is it was written by King himself just days after. And its context there is April 16th arrest in Birmingham, Alabama. So that is the importance of sources when it comes to in analyzing or examining sources. Okay, to end, let's watch this video.
Introduction. Historical research
writing and studies are carried out with an objective of understanding the chronology of the past events and their interconnections. This is a continuous process. In the physical and natural sciences, the empirical method or laboratory method of experiments and observation is used to verify the available knowledge. This method allows formulating laws that remain true irrespective of the time and space. Those laws can be tested and proved repeatedly. In historical research, it may not be possible to use the method of laboratory experiments and observation. This is so because we are not present in the historical time and space, and the historical events cannot be recreated. Also, in history, it is not possible to formulate laws that remain true irrespective of the time and space. To begin, we need an expert who knows the language and script of a historical document in order to read it and understand its meaning. Also, the experts can examine the authenticity of the document by using criteria such as lettering style, author's style of writing, manufacturing date, and type of paper, stamps of authority, etc. Such a document is further scrutinized by a historian with the help of relevant historical references. Methods of various disciplines are useful in historical research. For example, archaeology, archival science, manuscriptology, epigraphy, that is study of inscriptions, analysis of lettering style, linguistics, numismatics, that is study of coins, genealogy, that is study of lineage, etc. Historical research method. Let us learn how historical research is written. Writing of historical narrative. Examining relevant references of the available historical information. Collecting historical information, highlighting the processes that led to historical transitions, carrying out comparative analysis. Understanding the references regarding time and space of the given historical events, and also various conceptual frameworks used in historical research method. Formulating relevant questions in view of the historical references. Critically examining of various sources of history. Formulating hypotheses.
That ends. And I hope you've learned a lot. And happy learning. Thank you.